So welcome to Organizing Without Permission, a panel that DSA's Labor Working Group in Madison is hosting. Tonight, we're going to be having a conversation with members of UE Local 150 in North Carolina, as well as two labor activists from Wisconsin. My name is Alice Herman, and I'm going to be moderating tonight's panel. I'm a journalist, and I cover labor and politics in the state of Wisconsin. I'm also a member of Madison DSA's Labor Working Group. So collective bargaining is illegal in the public sector in North Carolina due to North Carolina General Statute 9598, which the NAACP has identified as North Carolina's last Jim Crow law in effect. The statewide UE Local, which was founded by members of the organization Black Workers for Justice, brought the state of North Carolina to the International Labor Organization in 2005 to challenge that law. And in 2007, the ILO ruled that the law violated international agreements. Unfortunately, it remains in effect. But despite the illegal status of collective bargaining, the union has organized thousands of city and state workers, winning, among other things, a minimum wage of $15 an hour for state employees, which is really incredible. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, state workers effectively lost the right to collectively bargain in 2011 with the passage of Scott Walker's Act 10. And union membership has dropped by over 30% in the years since. So we're hosting Local 150 to discuss the history of their union and how they've managed to build a vibrant union without bargaining rights, as well as their campaign to overturn the racist Jim Crow laws preventing the right to collectively bargain. So without further ado, I am really excited to introduce the following speakers for tonight's panel. We have Nathanette Mayo, the former president of UE 150, Angaza Laughinghouse, also a former UE 150 president, Darrion Smith, UE Eastern Region Vice President. And then from Wisconsin, we have Frank Emspak, Professor Emeritus of the School for Workers and a longtime union activist with the UE, IUE, and AFT. We're also going to have Kate Walton, who is a UW Hospital RN, a union organizer with SEIU Healthcare Wisconsin. So our panelists have a lot to teach us about, and I want to just thank them again for being on this panel. So to sort of introduce things here, I'm going to turn this over to Frank for a couple of minutes to talk briefly about the passage and consequences of Governor Scott Walker's 2011 Act 10, which deprived most public sector workers of the right to collectively bargain. Go ahead, Frank.
Okay, well, Scott Walker and the Republicans had been gunning for the public sector for some years, especially the teachers. And the net result was that we had approximately, I would guess, about 180,000 public sector workers in AFSCME, the NEA, which is WEAC, Wisconsin Education Association Council, and the AFT. So the net result of Scott Walker is that we probably have about 80,000 now at the most, very most. So they've reduced it by 50%, essentially getting rid of AFSCME in its entirety, the AFT pretty much in its entirety. And what I mean by that is that in one local of the AFT, we had 4,800 members, and now there are 49 members, not 4,900, just 49. So that's the extent of the destruction. Now, the reason is this, in my opinion, the whole direction of the public sector had been basically political, and that there was opposition to any kind of shop floor organizing. So at the elections in 2010, the Democrats had a majority of 1 in the Senate. He quit in the middle and said, I'm done with you guys. There was no contract. And so when AFSCME said, my God, what are we going to do? They turned to Scott Walker. He said, you don't have a contract. We don't have to talk to you, and we're not going to do it. And that was that, and legally speaking. Well, 100,000 people show up at the Capitol, most of them incidentally not being unionized people, just regular people who were concerned. The labor movement had no strategy to deal with the attack on collective bargaining. And for instance, there was no sign-up material, join a union at the Capitol Square ever in the 5 or 6 weeks of these mobilizations. The state public sector leadership was meeting across the street in the hotel from the Capitol. They never once met with the people leading the demonstrations inside the Capitol, particularly the Teaching Assistants Association. And no public sector union asked any of their members to do anything whatsoever other than show up on the weekend, except for the Madison Teachers Inc., which figured out a way to use the First Amendment. And people said, well, we can't work here anymore, and took 3 or 4 days off before there was an injunction. But the fact of the matter is, there was practically no kind of shop floor mobilization whatsoever, which in my view was a complete disaster. And the net result was the law passed. And it might have passed anyway, but nonetheless, then the unions were eviscerated. So that's my 2-minute summary. And I just have a 30-second personal note. As many of you know, I'm just thrilled that the UE is here tonight. UE Local 150 is carrying on the traditions of the UE, I think, and of democracy and membership direction. And as some of you know, is my father, who was the first Secretary Treasurer of the UE from 1938 until he passed away in 1962. So this is just a wonderful thing, and I'm just really happy to have been able to help participate.
Thank you, Frank. That brings us right into our next part of our conversation with Kate, who has been organizing with UW nurses over the last year or so. And of course, Kate is organizing in a context where the employer is so far unwilling to negotiate with the union to establish a contract, and that they can do so because of Act 10. So yeah, Kate, if you can just tell us about sort of how you've organized, what the goals are so far, and some of the challenges and successes you've seen along the way.
Sure. First of all, can you hear me? I switched over to my headphones because there was some background noise. So can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I want to point out, just because it's kind of important, Frank gave a good summary, but the thing that Act 10 did that a lot of people don't know is that it specifically listed UW Hospital, where I work, and listed, like, struck out our right to collective bargaining. So Act 10 basically, said this is an at-will state, but in Act 10, it specifically prohibited UW Hospital employees from ever having collective bargaining rights at all. So it's put us in kind of an interesting position. We're trying to basically get the hospital board, Hospital and Clinics Board Authority, to agree to voluntarily recognize our union and direct the management to essentially meet and confer with us. But it's an uphill battle. We're also in a weird position where we're a public and private hospital. It's like a public-private partnership. So it means that we don't have a specific labor board that we can show up with cards in hand and say we'd like an election, like a lot of places can, because that's been pretty much, each board could punt us to the other one. Neither one of them has to say yes. So we found that we're looking for voluntary recognition, which has been, but it's also something that we've had a lot of great support on. So I think the number one thing, if you're asking about our goals, the number one thing we want is a voice. We want a seat at the table. Nurses are patient advocates. It's very much in our description of our jobs as our role. It's something that we all sort of see ourselves at. We're the ones who are at the patient bedside or in the clinics, giving medication, double checking the orders, making sure it's the right dosage, making sure it's the right patient. We're the ones that are kind of the frontline workers with the patients. We're the ones seeing their vital signs changes, their mental status changes. So we feel very strongly, just nursing as a whole, our job is to be an advocate for our patients and an advocate for ourselves. And we don't have that right now. We have an administration that is since Act 10 and since our union has gone away. We were unionized before Act 10, but since then they've really taken things from a fairly integrated model where we had a voice and we had a seat at the table to a very top down, what the administration says goes. And we don't even get asked our opinion, much less get a chance to actually make meaningful change. So we've been, excuse me, we've been organizing to make sure that our voices are heard with the hospital administration. So we've had some success with that. We've had great community support. We did a card drive to essentially get folks signed up who want a union, and that honestly went really well. It was not a difficult ask. You know, I think the traditional kind of thinking is that most places you'll have 30% of people want a union, 30% of people are completely opposed to it, and 40% of the people are like, yeah, whatever. So we didn't find that to be true in our organizing. It was not a hard sell. Nurses at UW are honestly tired of not having a voice and not being listened to and not getting to be involved in the decision-making process. So it was honestly an easy conversation to have with a lot of people. We also have been able to, in some ways, make our voices heard. We had a fairly robust shared governance system where there are nursing councils that get input in what happens in the hospital and some decisions that are made. That's been eroded since Act 10, and the administration has really controlled that process. They've been setting the agendas, as one of my coworkers put it, and fellow organizers. The nursing councils are supposed to solve the problems that they make, but then we have no actual power to fix anything. So they kind of gotten caught between a rock and a hard place. So those were expanded for a little while. That's sort of, for those of you here at the meeting, the public board meeting in February of last year now, that's something that we sort of attained at that meeting with your support, is that the board directed the hospital to really start using shared governance to give the nurses a voice, which was and wasn't working. And then with the pandemic, they've suspended meetings for the last few months because we were getting busy, which isn't necessarily the wrong decision. But at the same time, it's not something that we ever had a say in. So again, it just comes back to, we don't ever get to make these choices for ourselves and for our patients. So speaking of the pandemic, that's also kind of put it in sharp relief, how important it is for us to have a voice. It's obviously a situation that changes very quickly, day to day, but the communication and the decision making there has just been, again, it's new policies every day, whether that's in regards to PPE usage and how long we're wearing masks, or even just, you know, communication about how much PPE we have, policies on what patients are supposed to be wearing. You know, when we had visitors, right now we're not allowing visitors in the hospital. It's just been a lot to keep up with. And again, nobody's asking us. This is just things that get told to us. So the only other thing that, you know, I want to add and point out is that Meriter Hospital is also, we're organizing with SCIU, and Meriter Hospital is also an SCIU organization. So they're going through a contract negotiation right now, and we're very committed to supporting them. I know also there's nurses at St. Mary's that have been trying to organize or wanting to organize, you know, and ideally we'd like to see all the nurses in Madison organized and unionized, so that we can have a voice and advocate for our patients, because we're the ones who aren't going, like, looking to save money over saving patients, right? We're the ones that are there advocating for our patients and doing what's best for them and what's right for them. So that's been our struggle lately. You know, especially after this pandemic, it's time for us to get the respect and the protection that we deserve. We feel that that's true of us, and that's true of nurses everywhere. So that's been our last couple of years.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, thank you for that sort of rundown of what's been going on at UW and the status of, like, the relationship between administration and the union. So we're gonna kind of pivot over to our conversation with UE150, and I'm hoping that we can get some context for their organizing, as well as hear about some of the tactics that has allowed UE150 to, to be a really powerful union, despite the fact that, like the UW nurses, they don't have the legal protections, that they should be afforded. First, to get some history about the local, I have a question for Angaza. So members of the organization Black Workers for Justice organized hundreds of workers around the state before the foundation of UE Local 150. So can you tell us a little bit about the kinds of struggles that Black Workers for Justice has organized around historically, and how the organization sort of turned into what became this powerful statewide local? How did you mobilize other forces in your support, and how are you sort of operating now? How are you financing yourselves, et cetera?
First, I'd like to state that we're at the very first day of Black History Month, and we need to acknowledge that. Too often, labor does not acknowledge Black labor, which started during slavery. So there's this radical tradition that has grown out of the Black labor movement. Don't forget, the first labor actions were the rebellions against slavery. It was Nat Turner, Gabriel. We had guns, we had swords. We stood up, we fought, and we didn't wait for anyone to give us the privilege of a right. We knew that that was a basic human right that we needed to move forward and fight for. So I would like all my white comrades to really take some time out Black History Month to acknowledge the central role of Black labor from the slavery period to fighting for the International Pullman Car Porters Union, which Brother A. Philip Randolph and the DRUM, the Detroit Revolutionary Union Movement, and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers out of the Chicago, Detroit area. There's a long tradition. Need to study that because we certainly did. Black Workers for Justice members are products of that 1960, 70 freedom movement, Black liberation movement. And that became the model for us building Black Workers for Justice way back in 1981. And yes, I am that old. And I'm one of the founding members, but want to remind folks that there's always been a radical tradition in Black labor. And many of those lessons that we learned from history, we tried to implement. The first thing we began doing in Black Workers for Justice is beginning to organize in the Black working class communities. We live in Black working class communities where some of the worst conditions exist and where many of the workers work in some of the worst conditions, as sanitation workers, as factory workers, poultry workers. So we began organizing way back in the early 1980s, what we call workplace committees. Some workplace committees never grew beyond 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 people out of hundreds or thousands of workers. So when we began digging into the public sector, we began organizing with 5, 6 workers. Who would guess that we would ever grow into the union that we are now? However, we always understood the importance of having community allies. So we also organized, while we were organizing in the workplace, we always organized around voting rights, against unequal municipal services, unequal discrimination in municipal services. We organized against police brutality. So we were always organizing in both the workplace and the community. I think that positioned us to begin to expand our union. Or at this time, we were just workplace committees. So we had a campaign called the Workers Want Fairness campaign. That campaign created a workers' school way back in the early 1980s. These workers' schools understood the importance of cadre. Many of these left forces understand what cadre are. They're like the Navy SEALs. the specialists, the people who go on a mission, and they build organizations despite the challenges. Their job is to make sure the rubber's meeting the road. So we began building cadre through workers' schools, training our Black Workers for Justice members to be organizers inside these workplaces. Some of these workplaces were not just in the public sector. They were in auto plants. They were in pharmaceutical companies that were relocating from the Northeast and Midwest. So very important that our reliance was not on international unions coming in to organize, but on the workers themselves. I think this is what is lacking in today's labor movement. Brother Darrion Smith, our comrade over there with that bandana on, and Sister Nathanette Mayo, we work regular jobs. What we do after work is what we do as what I call social movement trade unionists. We volunteer. Matter of fact, we only have one staff member for all 16 areas where we have union members. And folks like Darrion and folks like Nathanette are the real leaders that build our sector organizations. We call them sectors since we consist of a private sector, a state sector of workers, and also a municipal sector of workers. And they are the leaders that help us plan the organizing. And we're just very fortunate that many of these efforts began to grow. We grew from, lucky if we had 5 or 6 in the city of Raleigh at one point, and at our highest point had over 250 members. No, we didn't have collective bargaining right, but what we did have was these community connections. We also had shop floor actions, petitions. We did informational pickets. And later on, as we formed other unions, we even did some strikes. Even though they were illegal, we still struck. We closed down these workplaces in Raleigh, Durham, Greenville. And people asked us, so if it was illegal, why didn't they arrest all of you guys? I think the question of not only the militancy of the workers, but also, and by the way, our union is pretty close to 98% Black. I think that's because these workers work in some of the worst conditions. That's why we hit them first. They have the most to lose, or they have the least to lose, since they work in such bad conditions. And we were able to, build brick by brick the Raleigh City Workers Union, the Durham City Workers Union. These are all locals of our big statewide local, they're chapters rather. And we also were able to launch a election campaign at Rocky Mount Engine Plant in Tarboro and Rocky Mount area. We did not win that election, but we still had a union. We don't have to wait for them to recognize us. The original unions that we organized back in the 30s and 40s, they didn't wait for anyone to recognize them. They didn't wait for the National Labor Relations Board to recognize them or wait until we had the National Labor Relations Act. They began organizing and they began paying their dues and having fundraisers. That's the kind of rank and file democracy and vision that we really need in our unions. So let me move on to the next step. After we began organizing these workers into various chapters, we created, this is before UE even came in, we developed the North Carolina Public Service Workers Network. It was a network of some were members of the of a group called Equal Treatment Now, which was the Department of Transportation workers for the state. Some were members of various cities who had built workplace or small associations. And we were able to continue to convene what we call public sector workers assemblies. And these assemblies were when workers came together to hammer out their problems, give reports. So finally, we became the North Carolina Public Service Workers Organization. We were no longer a network. We had elected officers. We had more structure. And people asked us, we heard about this tour you guys went on called Organize the South Tour back in the late 80s, early 90s, where we raised money to get on vans and take workers who've never had any exposure to unions to the Northeast cities like Baltimore, DC, New York, up there to New Hampshire, Boston, and also to the Midwest and the West. And it was the first time they saw how unions operated. And as we know, that wasn't going to be our model because many of them had collective bargaining rights. We didn't. due to the ban on collective bargaining rights, although we know it violates our international human rights, which we'll talk about later. So that wound up helping us build relationships with international unions, and we interviewed which international union we wanted to affiliate with. They did not send people down here. We were self-organized. That says something. When workers self-organize, they have their own leadership in place. And UE and the Communication Workers of America, SEIU, asked me a host of unions. We interviewed them, and we said we were going to deal with the union that we thought was the most progressive and that really believed in rank and file democracy. Since we already had our leadership, we didn't need them to come and tell us. As a matter of fact, it's not by accident that many of the Black Workers for Justice members were hired as the staff initially to do the organizing at some point. But the main point is, though, is that we selected which union we wanted to affiliate with, since it was really an affiliation rather than an international union bringing professional staff down to organize. We told them what we needed to expand our organizing. And as you can see, that we're still standing. How many years was that, Ned? How long? When did we have our founding convention? 22 years. 22 years. We've been doing what we've always done, building our union from the bottom up, and also looking for new opportunities, which we're discovering right now. We're engaged in doing some organizing now with some of our UE support and national support, some new locals in Virginia, and also here in Raleigh at a meat protein plant. As y'all know, a lot of meat processing workers are really suffering with the present conditions. And that's where we're digging in hard. And when I say hard, we don't need recognition. We may not even get to an election. And if we don't, most unions walk away rather than say, well, the workers are the union, whether we win the election or not. And we just keep digging and fighting, as we have with these, what we call pre-majority unions. So I think I ran out of my 10 minutes.
You can take your time and wrap up.
All right. Well, I think the other question is, you asked us, how did we come up with our financial support? Well, you know, people laugh when we tell them that our union dues is $20 a month. They said, that's all you pay? Well, we have a very, you know, at one point we had workers barely making a minimum wage before we fought, and we were able to force the bosses to raise the wages in the private sector, in the various municipalities, and certainly I think Darrion's going to speak to state government. We were able to push things, you know, push the wages up. We were able to even win what we call our own style of collective bargaining, which is called an executive order we got from the governor after pushing and fighting to win what we call meet and confer. Even on the municipal level, we have what we call meet and confer practices, where they meet with us. We meet with the mayor, or we meet with the managers, or even the governor. We meet with the governor. All of our leaders, we just pile up in there. If we got to use public opinion to get an extra meeting or two, we do whatever we need to by taking direct action. During the COVID, I'll never forget seeing Brother Darrion and Sister Nathanette and others standing in front of the state capitol, embarrassing the governor and state government because they weren't addressing the safety issues that we needed for the COVID. And we were willing to do whatever we had to do, and we've done rallies, car caravans, and workers have taken what we call determined action. We didn't say strike, but same thing, determined action to let them know that we have the power.
Thank you so much, Angaza. So our next, let's see, our next speaker is going to be Darrion. And my question is, I guess kind of broad, but what is the role of UE Local 150 in workers' lives? What kinds of protections does the union offer? Tell us a little bit about your history with the union.
First of all, I want to say good evening to everyone, and thank you for allowing us to share our experience with you. First of all, I would like to read the statute 9598, just to familiarize everybody on exactly what it says. Contracts between units of government and labor unions, trade unions, or labor organizations concerning public employees declared to be illegal. any agreement or contract between the governing authority of any city, town, county, or other municipality, or between any agency, unit, or instrumentality thereof, or between any agency, instrumentality, or institution of the state of North Carolina and any labor union, trade union, or labor organization as bargaining agent for any public employee of such city, town, county, or other municipality or agency or instrumentality of government is hereby declared to be against the public policy of the state, illegal, unlawful, void, and of no effect. And that came on the books in 1959. So this is the statute that we have up against us. What role does UE150 play in workers' lives? I work for Department of Health and Human Services, which is with the state. So basically what we do, first of all, we educate our workers on the policies of the state, because as state workers, we are governed by the NC legislator. See, they vote on what type of raises we get. They vote on that stuff. They vote on our benefits and things like that. So we have to first let them know or educate them on the policies of the NC legislator. And then I work, like I said, I work for DHHS. So then we have to educate them on the policies of your specific facility that you work at within DHHS, because DHHS has their own broad policies, but the divisions or the facilities, which are 13 facilities under the DHHS division, each facility can make up their own workers' policies also. So we have to educate our workers on 3 different levels: the state level with the NC legislator, the DHH level that governs all the DHHS facilities, and those particular policies in those particular facilities where our workers work at. So we're up against 3 things right there. So what we do, we provide, our people with a voice, because of statute 9598. They try to take away our voice, but as working class people, we're going to have our voice heard anyway. So what we do is what we call meet and confers, as Angaza told you earlier. A meet and confer is with the DHHS secretary. That's what we initially do with the DHHS secretary. So the rest of our meet and confers are either with their subordinates, so either the deputy secretary or the DSOF director, which is the division of state and health facilities. So what we do is, of course, we have meetings with our workers. We have we get all of the concerns that we have of our workers in these different facilities, the policies, and we come to them, and we also offer solutions when we come to them, because you want to give them solutions and not let them think of their own solutions. You want to kind of put in what you want for the workers, and we have a conversation with them. So we collectively bargain as without collectively bargaining with the people at the downtown offices. So basically, what type of things do we offer? We have stewards. We have stewards in every facility that know the laws. So what we do is when you have a grievance, or when a worker has a grievance, they have to be their own advocate. Because within the state facilities, you cannot have any union representation until it goes to court, which is the Office of Administrative Hearings. So you have to be your own lawyer. So what we do, we help our workers with the paperwork. We go over the different policies and state laws that we need to do to fight unjust firings or unjust mispromotions, or if they overlook for promotions and things like that. So first of all, what you do is you put in your grievance paper. So we file those papers. The second thing that we have to do in the grievance filing is that you have a meeting with your management. So you talk with the management, you have they're called pre-disciplinary hearings. So you state your case or whatever, you do this, you do that, and then the management makes a decision. So usually the management goes with, they fire one of our workers. So the third step we have to do, we have arbitration, where they send another person from a different facility or a different division within the state that works in the HR that interprets policies. And of course, the management is on one side, you're on one side. It's like holding court, but you're not in the courtroom. and the judge is a person from HR from another department that's not DHHS. So if you don't get things worked out within that, then that's when you go to the Office of Administrative Hearings, and you could have your union representative with you. And of course, you could have your lawyer, your law representative of employment law. So we offer many services to our workers as far as we find them employment. We have a network of employment law we work with that we hook our people up with. We have stewards. We offer, of course, monetary help as far as we pay for lawyers. We pay for lawyers for a lot of our workers. If somebody's in trouble, we'll take up a contribution from our workers and things like that. For me, I got fired in 2012. I met Angaza Laughinghouse. He was the president at that particular time. Angaza hooked me up with many different jobs so I could still pay my bills and things like that. So we have a network where we help our people as we're helping them fight and get their jobs back. They can still be able to sustain life, pay bills, and provide for their families. So those are the type of protections that we do offer our members, and those are the type of things that we do as far as being confirmed with the state level. Okay, my history with BWFJ and UE Local 150, I can go into a little bit of that. A brother by the name of Kevin Yancey introduced me to UE 150. I used to work at Murdoch Developmental Center, and he was one of the stewards there. And so he used to come and talk to me, and he told me the benefits of a union. He told me the benefits of organization and the benefits of being part of collective power. So this is what made me join. We have a newsletter that we come out with like every month that tells everything that's going on within every sector, the municipal, the state, the private sector, universities and things like that. And I had a coworker that I had been working with for 6 months that the union helped him get his job back. So henceforth, I said, you know what? Kevin had been working on me. I said, fine, I'll join. Henceforth, did I know 4 months later that I would be in that same situation. So henceforth, how I became a part of BWFJ is that Angaza Laughinghouse was our president at that time. And he's one of the founding members of BWFJ. So he got to know me. And like I said, he helped me with my situation. He helped me get jobs. He gave me odd jobs and paid me and things like that. And so we got to know each other, and he liked my character and things like that. So he said, let me tell you about my organization. And henceforth, I learned that UE150 is a byproduct of the work that Black Workers for Justice have been doing since the early 80s. So he vouched for me as far as becoming a member, and that's how I became a member of Black Workers for Justice. And henceforth, I became an activist for workers' rights because something egregious happened to me. And sometimes it takes that for people to understand the importance of things as far as workers' rights and being a collective, because you really understand things when they affect you. If things don't affect people, they usually don't pay attention to. But when it affects you, you really learn the importance of unity in workers' power in the organizations. And that's how I came to be a part of UE 150 and also a part of Black Workers for Justice.
Thank you for kind of laying out those specifics and giving us your context too, Darrion. So my last question, or I guess a collection of questions, is for Nathanette. So UE Local 150 has won concessions from the state as well as municipal governments. And my question is, how did you secure those wins? And what advice would you have for public sector workers in Wisconsin who maybe had legal union protections, but don't have them anymore?
All right. Again, thanks for having us here tonight. We have had a lot of wins, and a lot of them were based upon the things that the campaigns that we've had over the years. And a lot of them have been because of just the tenacity of our members and how we organized. Angaza and Darrion have talked about the importance of workers being active, workers being organized, and workers being educated, and knowing what the policies are knowing what the laws are and being able to, I mean, that's the strength that we have, knowing those backwards and forwards, being able to educate our members about them so they know them back and forwards. And so when things occur in the workplace or on the shop floor, they're able to use those policies to fight for justice. Now, those policies, they're not policies that are put there just for the workers, the frontline workers. Those policies affect everybody. So our responsibility is to hold management to those policies, keep their feet to the fire. Just like they try to use them on us, we flip them over and use them on them. For health and safety, for instance, one thing that our union did years ago was we started to have, establish our own health and safety committees in our different chapters. So those workers would look out for if we got concerns about, what was happening, if it was safe working practices in our workplace. They knew OSHA laws and OSHA standards. We went around and we did our own inspections, and we would write up, health and safety, bad health and safety violations on our jobs, and we would file grievances, on those conditions that we found, and even take, if when we needed to build support, we knew a lot of our members, a lot of our folk actually are active. We got church organizations, we got civic organizations that we're a part of, we got motorcycle clubs that we're a part of, we belong to recipe exchanging clubs, we belong to all kinds of organizations. So we know the importance of finding the connections between what we do on our job and what happens in our communities. A lot of us are environmental activists. And so we share what's happening on our job. We know how that affects what happens in our community. If our job is putting out toxic substances and affecting workers on the job, but those toxic substances are also being dumped in the rivers and lakes. If we're working in water departments and we know stuff is escaping into streams and ponds and poisoning fisheries and stuff downstream, then we have a responsibility to not only fight for health and safety issues on our jobs, but we have a responsibility to take that information and fight for health and safety and good environmental practices in our communities too. So we understand the connection and we use those connections to build support and power for the campaigns that we have in the workplace. So we developed health and safety committees, and in order to get management to move on those concerns that we had to bring community folk in. We had to have them write letters or make phone calls or come to city council meetings or make sure they make a trip down to the legislature when we had legislative lobby days, and maybe send letters or send postcards, petitions, all of that. We had to, ask for their assistance to do that. We had to build alliances with community organizations, with our church organizations down in Rocky Mount, the Rocky Mount engine plant. They've built a great alliance, that UE chapter, and henceforth the whole statewide union, but started with that chapter, has built a great alliance with, we have 23 churches down there who have signed off. They helped push us to get Martin Luther King a paid holiday for the workers at the Rocky Mount engine plant, but they also have fought for $15 minimum wage. They've also fought for health and safety issues on the job. They allow us to put newsletters in their churches. They allow us to come in and do programs, forums. They've done fundraisers, choir singings, have concerts that support some of the work that we've done. So they've come out, and there's this religious and worker alliance has helped us down east to get the word out to also assist workers in terms of, if we need to do fundraisers for a campaign, they've been there to support us in that. So that's, one of the importance of having these connections with community organizations. And in turn, the community that I'm from, the Shiloh community, had a Superfund site, Environmental Protection Agency Superfund site. This company ended up poisoning the water throughout the community. But our union, the Durham City Workers Union, we had organic chemists who worked in the water department who were able to come to community meetings and take all of these tests that had been done by various, Environmental Protection Agency laboratories, the results of which lay people would not be able to understand. But we had organic chemists who were able to come to community meetings and sit down with community members and go through the results from those tests and be able to explain, to everyday working class folk what those numbers meant and what it meant for the community to be active and to have knowledge enough to be able to fight back and make sure that the water got cleaned up in our community and people were provided clean water and a safe community. Also, throughout in New Bern, we've have some workers who've been working with, hurricane survivors, Hurricane Florence down there, the flooding down there. So we've had members who've been able to go in and talk with the community there and assist the community. So I'm saying this, building alliance, we have mutual concerns and the connection between what happens on our job and what happens in the community. We can't separate that. So that's an important thing that we have to keep in mind. So our union, we've built those alliances. We've built, committees. We've gone around and done inspections. We've done investigations. We had a harassment investigation in the city of Durham where we went around, our union formed a committee and we took our time, whether it's on our lunch break or whatever, we went around and we did inspections. We saw the harassment, the posters of half-naked women on the walls, or we saw pornographic magazines that in some of the workplaces that the folk had. And we took pictures and had all this information, and we proposed a policy based on zero tolerance of, harassing items and sexist items in the workplace. And we're able to present that to city council folk. So when Darrion said, when we go and do meet and confers, when we sit down and we talk with management, we don't let them give us what their solution is. We already have a solution in mind and we present that solution to them. We already have something written up that we give them and tell them this is what we want and this is how we'd like to see them implemented. So one of the things that, and I know some folk do that, but always keep in mind to have your own solutions to the problems. Don't let them provide you with anything. They can provide the money for solving it, but don't let them, tell you what the solution should be. We've had informational pickets. We've put out informational flyers. We've had, garbage sanitation workers take flyers and newsletters around to the people in the communities on their routes to have them call in or sign a petition or just to let them know what was happening in the workplace, just keeping the community involved in what's happening throughout the city, throughout the state, or in these private industries, just making sure that everyone is aware, because when they get you with fear or when they think they can pull you over to the side by yourself and just think that they can deal with you by yourself. But we like to get it all out there, put it all out there. And it was funny when I was a steward and representing people in grievances, the bosses would always say, it's confidential. You can't go out and you can't tell anybody this. And I would tell the workers, if you want to go out and stand in the middle of the street and you want to scream it from the top of your lungs, what's going on, then you can do that. The boss can't do that, but you can do that. And so we encourage folk to make sure that we're getting the word out, educating folk, but also building those alliances and letting the community know what's going on.
Good job.
And let me see what else here. And one of the things that we don't tell our members, we do not see our union as, or becoming a member in the union as an insurance policy or something that's gonna save you. We tell workers, or we encourage workers that, if you wanna build workers' power, because that's the goal here, to build workers' power, to change the power dynamics. If you want to build workers' power, then you have to have a union. If you want to be able to change what happens in the workplace, if you want to be able to present policies, if you want to be able to have your voice heard, then you have to be organized. That's a job. That's just all there is to it. You can't do it by yourself. So you have to be part of an organized workplace union. And we'd say it is a union. We're not a club, an association, or we are a union, and we have to claim that, and we have to be proud of that. So we tell workers, don't be afraid to call it a union. Don't be afraid to stand up and let your voice be heard. Don't be afraid to come together, because that's how we build the power. And so don't see us as a service organization. See us as a workers' power organization. And don't be afraid to hold management to the carpet, or to write them up, or to fight for what we want. One of the things that this is the last thing, one of the things that we've always also understood is that workers have to come together to build workers' power. You may work in different industries, but all workers need to have power. So the workers' assemblies have become very important in what we do to build workers' power. The whole fight for 15 and a union with SEIU in Durham, those restaurant workers, city workers didn't make $15 an hour. Some state workers didn't make $15 an hour. So that was an important campaign for us as a workers' assembly to take up and to fight for across the state. So we were able to get $15 minimum wage pay structures in place in several cities across the state, and some of the private facilities too. But it was important that as a workers' assembly that we took that campaign up together, because there are things that affect us throughout wherever we may work, whether we're private workers or public workers or nonprofit workers. There are things that affect us all that workers need to take up and fight for. So that was one thing. And also, across the South, but a lot of workers in the South right to work, have no collective bargaining or limited collective bargaining. So the Southern Workers Assembly is also, another form of workers' assembly that, kind of spawned the Durham Workers Assembly, the Raleigh Workers Assembly, that looked at that we all as Southern workers need to come together and fight for workers' organization across the South. And
8 states.
Yeah, in 8 states across the South. So, so those are a couple of things that have been important to us. And some of the things that we've won, like I said, increased wages are one of the campaigns that we recently have now is Safe Jobs Saves Lives. And that's our fight to make sure that workers have health and safety in terms of personal protective equipment during this COVID pandemic. Hazardous pay, staggered shifts, all of the health and safety things that we felt were necessary for frontline workers and workers who worked in the public sector and private factories, to make sure that if we're considered frontline, then we need to have the safe health and safety protective equipment in place, and we need to be treated and paid like if this is a hazard, we need to be paid like it's a hazard, and be compensated for the extra time and all of the health and safety precautions that we have to take.
Excellent job.
Darrion, Angaza. All right, I'm gonna stop right there.